Hey there, good evening, and welcome back to our midweek weekend wrap up, recap, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. We kind of recap the weekend and dive deep into some of the themes that we talked about. Pastor JD, and good to be with you this evening. And joining me today is Pastor Alan Flood, our student pastor here at Calvary. If you were here on campus or you checked out the live stream, Sunday, you saw Alan continued our series through the book of James, our journey through James, and we were in James chapter 4, verses 1 through 10. And before we kind of dive into some of those themes we talked about, just kind of let you kind of recap and refresh us on what James talks about there in chapter 4.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the real heart and the theme behind chapter 4 is this idea of humbling yourselves and this idea of submission. And specifically, one of the things that James hits on is this idea of friendship. And I really dove into it more on Sunday. But this idea that of friendship as we know it, it's completely different. It's this friendship that causes us to be completely submissive to God and completely given over to Him. And we find it to where basically what James says is you can't be a friend of God and a friend of the world at the same time. It's just not possible. And then it continues on and begins to talk about submission and the ways that we submit by pursuing God, by taking our sin seriously, and also, most importantly, by recognizing the devil's schemes and resisting the devil and the things that he tries to put in front of us. And so whenever we're able to submit in those ways, we're truly able to humble ourselves before the Lord, and He is able to give us grace. We receive grace that is greater than we could ever deserve.
Yeah, and it was and if you missed that, I encourage you to even right now pause it, go back and check out that message. And so, kind of going along with that, talking about that friendship, obviously in verse chapter 4, it talks about that we cannot be both a friend of the world and a friend of God at the same time. And you did such a great job breaking down really what friendship looks like.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of, I guess, in like you said, Sunday, in the age of social media, I've got 600 friends on Facebook.
Absolutely.
I mean, really, like half of them, you haven't met, 4 of them are your aunt who has like 4 different profiles because she's forgotten the word and been hacked a couple times.
Absolutely.
But in that passage, obviously in that time and setting, friendship really was a very different, had very different connotations.
Absolutely.
To it. Mm-hmm. But we talked about that you talked about that friendship, that it's restrictive, it goes deep, it invites critique, which is really, I guess, difficult for a lot of us
for sure.
Today to really invite that critique. But he really shows that God and the world are the, I should say, like polar opposites that he wants to describe. But one thing I think we see today, and this kind of what I want you to ask you kind of maybe to elaborate a little bit more on, is that we see a lot of in the church, a lot of believers who kind of want to straddle the fence. They kind of want to play that middle ground. When God says, and James says here in this passage that you're either going one way or the other. Like you can't as the slogan for Burger King, you can't really have it your way. I mean, it's one or the other. So what would you say? What kind of does James talk about? What would you say to kind of believers who are stuck in that between that, I really want to have a relationship with God, but there's kind of some stuff in the world that I kind of want to hold on to. Is that possible? And then if not, how do we kind of shift our focus and our mind to really to leave those things in the world and pursue the things of God?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think really the verse that speaks most boldly to this is James chapter 4, specifically whenever it is talking about friendship of the world. And James says in the second half of chapter 4, so whoever wants to be the friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. And I think, really, like JD, I think for a lot of us who have been to church all of our life, we confuse a relationship with God with religion. And I think those are two totally different things, because you can come to church, you can attend all the services, you can, go to worship, you can serve at VBS, you can do all these different things. But if you don't really have a relationship with God, it's not that your hand is on God and the world at the same time. It's that your hand is on religion and the world, and those two things oftentimes can go together because those two things are oftentimes related to checklists. Like, I'm going to do these things for myself, or I'm going to do these things so I feel like I'm a good Christian, that sort of mentality. And so my advice to anyone who basically would say, well, look, I find myself in this dilemma basically where I've got my hand on religion and I've got my hand on the world, would be that you need to take both of your hands off both of them, is what James says, and you need to run, not walk, you need to run towards a relationship with God, because that's the only thing that is truly going to change you. You'll be able to experience the fullness of his peace, his grace, his mercy that he has to offer you, and that's through a relationship with him, not religion, not having your hand on the world. And that's really the heart of what James says there in chapter 4.
Yeah, I mean, he uses that's really strong language.
Yeah.
That if you're going to be a friend of the world, you're going to be an enemy. Have enmity towards God. And that's really strong language. It's kind of hard, I think, some of us sometimes for us to really take that in of well, I'm not an enemy of God.
Yeah.
But if we're pursuing the things of the world, we very much are.
We are, yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Paul says that we were at once we were creatures of wrath. We were sons of wrath, sons of disobedience, and because of the gospel, because of the good news that we have been able to turn from that. The Lord has graciously brought us in through adoption to be one of His children. But then you continued on and talked about that. One of the ways that we begin to have our lives shaped by the gospel as we become, we release the world, become friends with God, is to submit. And the theme of humility seems to be a pretty constant underlying theme throughout this whole book. And I think sometimes when we think about humility, we get the idea that we think of it as a passive thing, that it's just kind of a hide in the corner, head down, kind of, just I'm humble, not going to do anything. But when you're talking about submission, to me, it came across as more of something that's inactive, takes on an active connotation.
Yeah, absolutely. It most certainly does. And I think really the heart of what James is saying here is that humility is encompassed by anything that causes you to submit. Right. And so, for many of us, if we have a sin struggle with pride, it may be us submitting our pride or being meek in the moment or being quiet in that moment. And so that very well may be the case, which oftentimes we tend to relate with this idea of being quiet, reserved, and those sorts of things in relation to humbleness. But at the same time, you have to recognize, one of the things James is pointing out here about submission is that we are going to, number one, recognize our sin, that we're going to take it seriously. That takes on an action connotation. We're going to pursue God. That means that we're not just resisting sin or resisting the devil, but we are pursuing something else actively in place of that, so that that sin or that desire no longer has that place within us, but we are filled with the passions of the Lord instead of the passions of ourselves. And then lastly, resisting the devil in terms of recognizing the devil's schemes in our lives. He knows the red buttons that he can push in each one of our lives. And I think sometimes we're the last ones to actually figure it out for ourselves. It's like, I don't know what sin struggle is mine, which one's worse, and Satan just keeps hitting the red button over and over again. He's got it. And so if we can recognize what those things are for ourselves, then all of a sudden it allows us to look at our life in the full spectrum that it is and say, look, these are the things that are really a struggle for me. These are the things that I need to avoid. And not only avoid these, but in place, pursue God with that, go to Him with full repentance, and be really, truly sorry for the sin that is in my life.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for the structure that James puts there. That it is we won't have the strength. Obviously, we as humans don't have the strength to resist the devil.
Absolutely.
But I think for a lot of times what I've seen, I know growing up, and then obviously working with students and preteens and kids is often they get a lot of the don't.
Yeah.
And not a lot of the do. And so they may know, okay, well, I shouldn't sin, and that obviously carries over to not just teenagers but adults as well. If I shouldn't sin, but they miss on that. Okay, I need to replace that with something else. And once I think that man, just the format that James gives us to that sequence there is just, it's so important.
It really is, and I think you really hit it on the head there because the sequence that he does give is this idea of resisting the devil, but recognizing that step one is only possible by you pursuing God, step two. Because without the power of God, you can never truly resist the devil and your selfishness. You have to be filled up with that. So for sure.
Well, I hope that I hope that you listened Sunday and took good notes and just remember that it is about submitting ourselves to the Lord. It is about placing ourselves in a place of submission to where that we run everything that we do, every thought, every action, every word, as James talks about throughout his book. We run it through that lens of submission to the Lord. Does what I'm saying honor the Lord? Does what I'm doing honor the Lord? Does this honor the Lord? And it's only through that that when we move that way, when we pursue that for our lives, that we're able to resist that temptation and ultimately grow in our sanctification.
For sure. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us.
Hey man, absolutely.
Good to hang out and thanks for preaching Sunday. It was a great word, and
thank you.
It was. I hope I said if you weren't able to be there, go check out it on. It's on YouTube. You can watch the replay on YouTube, on Facebook, and join in as well. We hope you join us this weekend. We'll be there 9 o'clock early service only on campus, or you can join us at 11 o'clock. We'll be on campus as well, or online, calvaryshreveport.org. You can find us on Facebook and on YouTube. Wherever you like to watch your live stream, you can pick us up there. And Lord willing, here in the coming months or so, we'll hopefully be able to gather back on campus as a family. We're looking forward to that as a staff. We love seeing your faces every Sunday morning, even if we only get to see part of them because they're covered up with a mask.
That's right.
But it's good to spend a little time with you this evening. Pray you have a blessed rest of the week, and we'll see you this weekend.